I never thought blood would turn against blood, not in the way it did with my brother. Growing up, we weren't just siblings, we were best friends, partners in crime, and the kind of kids who thought nothing could tear us apart. But I learned the hardest way that sometimes the sharpest knives aren't held by strangers. They're wielded by the people you trusted the most. It all began the day my parents passed. Losing them shattered me, but I clung to the thought that at least I still had my brother. I thought we'd grieve together, lean on each other, and share the weight of their loss. Instead, that's when his mask slipped, and I realized just how far greed could twist a person. At the reading of the will, I sat in a stiff leather chair, heart pounding as the lawyer opened the sealed envelope. My parents weren't wealthy in the flashy sense, but they had built a life of hard work, a modest home, a small business, and a few savings tucked away. Enough to ensure both of us would be stable, enough to honor their years of sacrifice. I remember clutching my brother's hand under the table, whispering, "Whatever it is, we'll split it, just like we always promised." He gave me a smile, small, reassuring, but in hindsight, chilling. Because behind that smile was a plan I didn't know existed. The lawyer read through the formalities, then listed the assets. The house, the savings account, the business. My parents had written that everything was to be divided equally between us. 50-50. Simple. Fair. Exactly what I expected. But what came next blindsided me. When the lawyer explained that the documents granting us joint control of the business and equal ownership of the home had been altered, my stomach dropped. Apparently, just days before their death, a revised will had surfaced. And this version left everything to my brother. Not half, not some. Everything. Froze. My first thought was disbelief. Surely this was a mistake. My parents would never do that. They loved us equally always. But my brother sat there calmly, hands folded, eyes avoiding mine. He didn't flinch, didn't protest, didn't even look surprised. It hit me, he had known. He had been waiting for this. When I whispered, "How could this be?" he finally met my eyes and said, "Maybe they trusted me more. Maybe they knew I'd take care of things." His voice was smooth, practiced. But I heard the cracks underneath. The days that followed were a blur of arguments, lawyers, and sleepless nights. I demanded answers. How had this will been changed? Why was there no mention of me? No acknowledgement of my parents' original wishes? The lawyer shrugged, claimed the documents were legally binding, stamped, and notarized. I knew my parents. I knew their handwriting, their intentions, their hearts. And I knew this wasn't them. It was him. My brother had manipulated, forged, or pressured them in their final days. And the cruelest part, he didn't deny it outright. Instead, he threw my pain back at me. "You always needed help," he sneered one evening when I confronted him. "They knew I was the responsible one. They knew you'd waste it." Responsible. This was the same brother who had dropped out of college, hopped from job to job, borrowed money he never repaid. But now, somehow, he was the chosen one. Well, I refused to believe that. For weeks, I wandered through life like a ghost. I lost the house I grew up in, the business my parents built, the sense of security I thought I had. But more than that, I lost the last piece of family I thought I could trust. Friends told me to move on. "It's just money," they said. "Let it go. Don't let it consume you." But it wasn't just money. It was betrayal. It was the erasure of my parents' true wishes. It was my brother looking me in the eye and deciding that I didn't matter. And that's when something inside me shifted. I stopped crying. I stopped begging. I stopped waiting for him to do the right thing. Instead, I started planning. Began by watching him. Quietly. Patiently. He thought he had won, but I saw the cracks forming in his perfect little empire. The business wasn't doing well under his control. He was overspending, bragging, throwing lavish parties in the house that used to be mine too. He thought the inheritance made him untouchable. He didn't realize it made him vulnerable. Late at night, I scribbled in a notebook. Not just angry words, but strategies. I remembered every story we had shared as kids, every secret he had whispered, every weakness he had revealed. I knew him better than anyone, and now that knowledge became my weapon. The first step wasn't revenge. It was rebuilding myself. I got a job, saved every penny, and focused on stability. I wanted to stand on my own feet before I made my move. Because revenge without power is just noise. I needed to be silent thunder, building, waiting, ready to strike when the time was right. Every time I walked past the old house, I felt fire in my chest. He'd wave smugly from the porch, as if daring me to fight back. And every time I smiled, nodded, and walked on. Because he didn't know the storm was already forming. The truth is, betrayal cuts deeper than any wound. But it also fuels a fire that nothing else can ignite. My brother thought he had taken everything from me. What he didn't realize was that by stealing what was mine, he gave me something far greater, the resolve to take everything he loved. And I meant it. Everything. The house, the business, his pride, his friends, his reputation. Piece by piece, I would dismantle the world he thought he had built. Not with childish tantrums, not with reckless anger, but with patience, precision, and the kind of quiet determination that he would never see coming until it was too late. That was the night I stopped being the victim. That was the night I became the storm. People think revenge is loud, messy, and fueled by rage. But the truth, the best revenge is quiet. It's methodical. It doesn't roar, it whispers. And by the time the target hears it, it's already too late. I knew I couldn't charge in headfirst. That would only make me look bitter and powerless. No, I had to be smart. I had to make him believe I'd given up. Let him get comfortable, arrogant, sloppy. That's when people make mistakes. So, on the surface, I played the role of the defeated sibling. I stopped arguing with him, stopped questioning the will, stopped fighting for what was mine. When neighbors asked how I was holding up, I smiled faintly and said, I guess things just weren't meant to be. And when I saw him around town, I even forced myself to nod politely, as if I'd accepted his victory. But behind that mask, every move I made was deliberate. The first thing I needed was information. Information is power, and I had an advantage. I knew my brother better than anyone. I knew his patterns, his weaknesses, his impulses. He craved validation, craved status, craved being seen as the successful one. That was the hole in his armor, and I intended to drive a blade right through it. I started with the business. Our parents had poured decades into it, treating every customer like family. They believed in honesty, reliability, and hard work. My brother, on the other hand, treated it like a trophy. He bragged about being the new owner, but he had no idea how to actually run it. Quietly, I reached out to old employees, vendors, and clients. Some of them still remembered me from the days I'd helped my parents after school. I listened to their frustrations. Late payments, broken promises, sloppy management. My brother was burning bridges faster than he could build them. All I had to do was offer them an alternative. And so I did. I scraped together my savings and launched a small competing venture. Nothing flashy, nothing big. Just a humble, honest operation that did one thing my brother had forgotten: treated people right. At first it was tiny, just a handful of clients. But word spread fast. People were hungry for reliability, for respect, for the values my parents had once instilled. And as my reputation grew, his began to crumble. The best part, he didn't even see it. He was too busy basking in his newfound wealth, too distracted by the applause of people who only cared about free drinks and flashy parties. He thought I was invisible, and that's exactly what I wanted. Still, business alone wasn't enough. If I wanted to take everything he loved, I had to go deeper. I had to target the things he valued most: pride, possessions, and people. One night, I attended one of his parties. Not because I wanted to be there, but because I wanted to observe. He had filled the house with strangers who laughed too loudly at his jokes and drank too heavily on his dime. And in the middle of it all, he stood on a chair, glass in hand, bragging about how he'd rescued the family legacy. The words burned, but I kept my face neutral. Let him gloat. Let him perform. Because I noticed something far more important: the way his so-called friends rolled their eyes when his back was turned. They weren't loyal. They weren't even impressed. They were opportunists, clinging to him for free entertainment. That was another weakness I could exploit. I began to weave myself into those circles, slowly, subtly. I didn't confront anyone, didn't reveal my intentions. Instead, I listened. I laughed at the right jokes. I offered sympathy when they complained about him. Piece by piece, I became the one they could trust. And soon, the gossip started to flow straight into my ears. Did you hear he missed another vendor payment? Did you see the way he screamed at the staff? Did you know he's drowning in debt already? Every whisper was a weapon, and I collected them all. But I didn't strike yet. No, I was patient. I let the tension build, let the cracks widen, let his own arrogance do half the work for me. Meanwhile, I kept expanding my business quietly, steadily. Clients he'd mistreated came to me willingly, grateful for a safe harbor. And then came the first real turning point. One afternoon, I ran into one of my brother's oldest friends, someone who had stood by him for years. I expected hostility, maybe even disdain. But instead he sighed and said, "I don't know how you do it. He's impossible these days." That's when I knew the tide had shifted. People weren't just tolerating my brother, they were starting to resent him. And resentment, once it takes root, spreads faster than wildfire. Still, part of me hesitated. This was my brother. We had once shared bunk beds, whispered secrets in the dark, defended each other on the playground. A small voice inside me wondered if I should stop, if I should try to mend the bond instead of tearing it further apart. But then I remembered the look in his eyes at the reading of the will, the smug satisfaction, the complete lack of remorse. He hadn't just taken money. He had taken my home, my security, my parents' legacy. He had looked at me and decided I was worth nothing. Well, forgiveness was no longer an option. So I pressed on. Over the next few months, I watched as his empire began to wobble. His friends started skipping his calls. His customers complained louder. His finances stretched thinner. And all the while, he strutted around like a king on a crumbling throne, too blind to see the ground cracking beneath him. And me waited. Because revenge isn't just about striking, it's about striking at the perfect moment. And that moment was coming soon. The first time I saw the fear flicker in his eyes, I knew my plan was working. It happened at a local business event, the kind of gathering my parents used to attend with pride. I hadn't planned to go, but several former clients of his had invited me, saying they wanted to introduce me to potential partners. I arrived quietly, no grand entrance, no flashy suit, just myself, steady and calm. My brother, on the other hand, showed up late, stumbling in with a half-buttoned shirt, a forced smile plastered across his face. He waved as if he owned the room, but the energy was different this time. The applause was thin. The smiles were strained. And when he finally spotted me in the crowd, standing among people who used to be his, the smirk on his face faltered. That was the first crack. I didn't need to humiliate him. I didn't need to make a scene. All I did was stand tall and shake hands, listening carefully as others complained quietly about his arrogance, his unreliability. He heard it too, though no one said it directly to his face. And that silence, those whispers, were louder than any public insult could have been. As weeks passed, the whispers became open complaints. Vendors refused to extend him credit. Customers walked away. Even his staff, the ones who had once admired him, began quitting one by one. And every time someone left him, they came to me. Still, I wasn't reckless. My goal wasn't just to outshine him. It was to dismantle him piece by piece, until there was nothing left. And so I waited until he was desperate. One evening, as I was closing up my modest office, he walked in. His shoulders were hunched, his face pale, but his eyes still carried that stubborn pride. "We need to talk," he said. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady. "About what?" "You're stealing my clients," he snapped. "You're turning everyone against me." I almost laughed. The audacity of that statement. But instead I tilted my head and said, "No, you did that to yourself. I just gave them an option." His fists clenched. For a moment I thought he might strike me. But then he exhaled sharply, like a balloon deflating, and slumped into the chair across from me. "Look," he muttered, "maybe we can work something out. Maybe we can split things." Split things. Exactly what should have happened from the beginning. Now, when his empire was in flames, he suddenly remembered the word share. I could have agreed. I could have taken half and ended the feud. But I remembered my parents' house. I remembered the smug look on his face when he stole it all. And I remembered the nights I cried myself to sleep, feeling like I didn't matter. "No," I said softly. "You made your choice. Now you live with it." His face twisted with anger. "You'll regret this." But I didn't. Because for the first time since that awful day at the lawyer's office, I felt powerful. After that meeting, things spiraled for him quickly. The bank foreclosed on one of his properties. The business teetered on the edge of bankruptcy. His so-called friends vanished overnight, leaving him with nothing but unpaid bills and empty bottles. I didn't celebrate loudly. I didn't gloat. I kept my focus sharp, making sure my own business grew steadily, responsibly. Because revenge isn't about flashy victories. It's about enduring success while your enemy crumbles. And crumble he did. But the strangest part came later, when the phone rang late one night. I almost didn't answer, but something in me, some mix of curiosity and old sibling loyalty, made me pick up. His voice was broken, slurred, soaked in alcohol and despair. "Why are you doing this to me?" he whispered. Closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to remind him that he started it, that he had stolen everything from me without a second thought. But instead I simply said, "Because you taught me I was nothing. And now I'm showing you what nothing feels like." There was silence on the line. Then a soft, bitter laugh. "You win," he muttered before hanging up. But it wasn't about winning anymore. As I sat in the dark, I realized something I hadn't expected. Revenge had given me power, yes. Had given me justice, yes. But it had also hollowed me out. The fire that kept me alive all those months now felt like ashes in my chest. Because no matter how much he lost, it didn't bring my parents back. It didn't erase the betrayal. It didn't heal the scar he left in my heart. And that's when I understood the real cost of revenge. Still, I couldn't stop. Not yet. He had taken too much, and the game wasn't finished. If I wanted closure, true closure, I had to see it through to the end. So I tightened my resolve. If he thought he had already lost everything, he was wrong. There were still pieces of his world left, pieces I intended to take. By the time the leaves began to fall that year, my brother was unrecognizable. The man who once strutted through town with his chest puffed out, bragging about his inheritance, now walked with slouched shoulders and hollow eyes. But still he clung to scraps of pride, scraps of identity. And that, I decided, would be the final pieces I'd strip away. He still had the house. The house where we grew up. The house where our parents had laughed and sacrificed and built memories. It was the crown jewel of his stolen empire, the one thing he clung to as proof that he hadn't lost it all. Every time I walked past it, I felt the sting of betrayal like salt in an open wound. And every time I promised myself that one day, those walls would no longer echo with his arrogance. But taking the house wouldn't be simple. He was barely keeping up with a mortgage, but as long as he had it, he would feel like he'd won. I needed to make sure that house slipped right through his fingers and landed squarely into mine. So I waited, patiently. I kept my ear to the ground, and soon enough, I heard whispers that the bank was preparing to repossess it. His debts had piled too high. His payments had stopped too long ago. All I had to do was be ready when the hammer fell. And I was. The day the house went up for auction, I sat quietly in the back of the courthouse, heart steady, face unreadable. He wasn't even there. He couldn't bear to watch. But I was. And when the bidding began, I raised my hand with calm precision, each gesture driving the nail deeper into the coffin of his pride. Minutes later, the gavel slammed. The house was mine. For a moment I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just property. It was vindication. It was reclaiming the place my parents had built, the place he had stolen. Now it was back where it belonged, not because he gave it willingly, but because I took it back with my own strength. When I told him, he showed up at my door, face red with fury, fists trembling. "You think this makes you better than me?" he shouted. "You think you've won?" I looked him straight in the eye and said, "No, this isn't about winning. It's about justice." He spat at the ground, turned and stormed away. But I could see it in the slump of his shoulders. He knew it was over. Still there was one more thread to pull. His reputation. Even as his world crumbled, he still clung to the image of being the successful one. He still told stories to anyone who would listen, spinning lies about his business ventures and investments. It was pathetic but dangerous, because as long as he wore that mask, people would believe him. So I tore the mask away. I didn't spread rumors. I didn't have to. Instead, I released the truth. The unpaid invoices. The testimonies of former clients. The court records of his debts. Piece by piece, I let the truth seep into the community like water into cracked stone. And once the truth began to flow, there was no stopping it. People stopped calling him successful. They stopped calling him at all. His name became a cautionary tale, a whispered warning about arrogance and greed. And me. My business flourished. My reputation soared. I wasn't just the sibling who'd been cheated. I was the one who rose from the ashes, who carried on my parents' legacy with integrity and strength. But here's the thing about revenge. It's addictive. Every victory tasted sweet, but it also left me craving more. Each piece of his downfall filled me with satisfaction, but also with a deeper hunger to finish what I started. And yet, late at night when the world was quiet, a question haunted me. Was I truly winning, or was I just becoming like him? 'Cause revenge changes you. It twists your heart, reshapes your soul. I had set out to destroy him, but in the process, I sometimes wondered if I was destroying myself. Still, the path was chosen. I couldn't stop now. Not when I was so close to taking everything he loved. And so I prepared for the final act. He had lost his money. He had lost his friends. He had lost the house, the business, the pride he once carried like armor. But there was one last thing left, one thing he clung to even in the ruins. The belief that he was untouchable, that he could still crawl back somehow. That belief had to die. I didn't know exactly how the end would come. But I knew this. When it did, it would be absolute. No half measures, no compromises. He had stolen everything from me once. Now I would take everything from him, until there was nothing left to take. The closing chapter arrived on an ordinary evening. I stood at the gate of the house and watched my brother move from room to room, touching pictures as if they belonged to a stranger. It felt strange to see him shrunken by his choices, a man hollowed by the pride that had pushed him to steal our inheritance and then squander it. I could have called him out in public or made a spectacle of his fall, but spectacle was never the point. My aim was to restore what was broken and protect the people who depended on our parents' work. When I knocked, he opened the door with an expression I had not seen since childhood. Shame braided with defiance. He asked me plainly what I wanted. I said simply, truth and responsibility. I offered him a path of repair, a way to apologize and to earn trust back through honest work. Pride made him refuse, so I completed the final steps I had planned in silence. I secured legal protections for the business and the property so creditors could not leverage the company to hurt employees or suppliers. I handled the paperwork that closed loopholes and prevented any easy reclaiming of assets. I did these things quietly because repair is not a circus. It is steady labor. The work that followed was not glamorous. It was meticulous. We reconciled accounts, renegotiated terms with vendors who had been burned, and redid contracts that had been carelessly signed. We apologized where apologies were due and made amends to customers who had been mistreated. Action, not rhetoric, rebuilt trust. Over time, the company steadied. Former employees returned when they saw consistent change and honest leadership emerging. The house, once a stage for bravado, became a place of planning and careful conversation. Rather than echoing drunken laughter that meant nothing, the rooms filled with practical meetings and hands that mended things. My brother drifted to the town's margins. He did odd jobs, slept on couches offered by people who felt pity, and sometimes lingered across the street to watch the porch being painted. I saw no triumph in his face, only the quiet loss that comes from choices fully owned. There were nights when I questioned the cost of my campaign. Retribution had taught me lessons about who I could become under the sway of hurt and rage. To avoid becoming what I despised, I pivoted more fully toward restoration. I guarded against gloating and focused on creating sustainable value for those who depended on the business. The staff, the vendors, the families who trusted us for their livelihoods. Months turned into a year. The name my parents had worked under regained respect through reliability rather than show. Customers returned because they could feel the difference. Consistent hours, fair pricing, and honest service. The porch and garden were cared for, but the deeper change was cultural. We rebuilt a set of values into daily practice. Then, one rainy afternoon, my brother stood at the restored door with a folded note. His apology was halting and imperfect, but it was the first true admission I had heard. He did not ask for immediate forgiveness or for me to erase what he'd done. He simply said he was sorry and that he was tired of being the person he had become. We did not reconcile in a movie-style montage. There were no dramatic hugs, no sweeping declarations. Instead, we spoke carefully of small memories. How our father read stories under a dim lamp, how our mother tended the garden, the crooked birdbath in the yard. The conversation was fragile, like two people learning to walk on new ground. Forgiveness, I realized, is not a single action but a series of choices. I could have let anger define my life going forward, or I could choose to channel the pain into something constructive. I chose the latter because I wanted a life freed from bitterness. People sometimes ask me if I regret the route I took. That question is not simple. I regret the nights spent plotting revenge, and I regret the way bitterness can harden a person. But I do not regret reclaiming what was taken from me or protecting the people who depended on our family business. The balance of those outcomes matters. As time passed, the town's memory of the feud softened into a story people told with different tones. Some whispered caution, others praised resilience. My brother found steady work that kept him honest. He never reclaimed the life he once had, but survival and steady labor brought a kind of dignity. He would sometimes nod when our paths crossed. I returned the nod without warmth or cruelty, just acknowledgement. The key lesson that emerged is this: strength is not only about what you take or how you strike back. True strength lies in what you build afterward. Taking back what was mine taught me to be strategic and resolute. Rebuilding taught me patience, humility, and a commitment to integrity. Those lessons mattered more than a tally of wins. In the end, the house stands mended, the business hums with steady purpose, and the community feels safer because one person chose to honor a legacy rather than let it be consumed by greed. My brother's actions catalyzed a painful test, but the result, messy and imperfect, was that something meaningful survived. I don't pretend that every scar disappeared. Some fractures remain, and memory keeps them raw at times. But the story closed not on vengeance alone, but on a complicated form of justice. Accountability coupled with reconstruction. That is the kind of ending I wanted. Not vindictive but firm. If you ever find yourself betrayed by someone close, remember this. You have a choice. You can let bitterness define you, or you can reclaim your life and rebuild from the ruins. Choose the latter if you want to be more than a footnote in someone else's story. Choose to build, to protect, and to live with integrity every single day.